Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 56, I think, of Sports Shorts. With my guest today, SLA board member, Lewis Brisbois partner, Gregg Clifton. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Bobby. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a real pleasure to have you. I know I appreciate the time our guests take out of their busy practices to spend a little time with us talking about what they do and what's going on. So let's jump right into it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what your practice is these days?
Sure. My practice has evolved. As you know, I was an agent for a long time representing players. And over the last 10 or 11 years, I've switched sides and gone to more of the corporate side, representing obviously companies and labor and employment issues, but more importantly, from the SLA's perspective, representing colleges, university professional teams, as well as coaches and others with regard to NCAA issues and any potential lawsuits and any other issues that arise on their behalf.
And so, you've given a little background of how you got to where you are now and what you're doing. But can you give us a little bit about your path, from law school to, were you in a firm? Did you go right into being an agent? What was your path?
Well, I always aspired to go right to being an agent, but unfortunately, back then it was challenging to become an agent because you had to try and find a client. And I was fortunate enough I got a chance to start working at Jackson Lewis, where I ended up leaving and coming back to as a management, labor, and employment lawyer. And there I worked on obviously arbitrations and other issues pertaining to labor law, like unfair labor practices and collective bargaining. And then along the way, I was fortunate enough to meet some people who introduced me to some players, and was lucky enough to get a chance to represent David Wells, who was one of my first players, who had obviously a meteoric rise once he got going, and then was able to recruit several other players after I had him. So for about 3 or 4 years, I was doing that part of my practice. And then I was fortunate enough to have Bob Wolf, who many of you may remember, who was kind of one of the grandfathers, now I'll call him, of the sports agent business, he and Mark McCormick. And I was fortunate enough to have him, someone who knew him, hear me speak at a New Jersey State Bar Association meeting. And he reached out to me and asked me if I'd be interested. And little did he remember, when I was an undergraduate in college, I used to come knocking at his door every semester, kind of begging for an internship. And once I got hired by him, I'll tell you, it's a funny joke, but it's truthful, is when I got hired, the woman there named Jill Leone, who was really Larry Bird's right-hand person, she looked at me and said, "You used to come all the time." I said, "Yeah." And then Bob Wolf explained to me, he said, "Greg, it was very difficult. We didn't have interns back then." He said, "Because how do I say no to whether it's Larry Bird or Larry King or Boys to Men or New Kids on the Block? Everyone wanted to hire interns, so we didn't hire any." So I unfortunately never got a chance to intern for him, but ultimately, numerous years later, after I had finished college and gone to law school, I got a chance to work side by side with him. Excuse me. And then unfortunately, after only a few years, he passed away of a heart attack. And then I got a chance to, as I would say, I went to law school for 3 and business school for 6, and got a chance to run Wolf Associates for the family for 6 years, which was an incredible experience, delving into all aspects of our business and expanding that business into event management and doing more things like that, other than the classic client representation that we had done for so long. And then I, bounced around a little bit for a couple of companies after that. And ultimately Jackson Lewis reached out to me and called me and asked me if I'd be interested in returning to head up a sports practice that they wanted to start. And I did that a little over 10 years ago. And then just about a year ago, I moved over to Lewis Brisbois and had a chance to now have a broader platform of work and areas of expertise that more lawyers have, to give me a broader base of business to be able to move into.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point you raised, that I think a lot of our younger members, and we do have such a huge student population, that don't really understand. And for those of us that have been working in this industry a long time, we sort of see the difference between lawyers, agents, the development of those practice areas. But, back in the day, I remember, in the mid 70s, when I was an undergraduate, before I went off to law school, friends of mine who were getting drafted, and, I say, "Well, who's going to represent you?" And they'd say, "Well, I've got this guy." And I'd say, "Well, is he a lawyer?" "Yeah, he's a lawyer, but he's my agent." And I said, "Well, I hadn't even started law school yet." And I go, "Well, so what's the difference?" And I think as we've gone on through time, we see so many graduates of law school admitted to the bar lawyers who then become agents. And I think people lose sight of the fact that you can't not be a lawyer suddenly and just call yourself an agent.
Very true. One of the things that's changed so much, Bobby, is, back then there was this really no line of demarcation between the two. People walked back and forth, and it was a really narrow field, because really the only way, if you're interested in sports law, to get into it was really to be an agent, because most of the teams lack the sophistication that we have now with general counsel and numerous legal members of their staff. Most colleges and universities did not have the legal staffs they have nowadays. So we've seen the industry really evolve, and it's been great because it's broadened out. It's given a lot more opportunities to people than like when I was in law school and you were in law school. That was really the only path into the business. Now there's so many avenues, not only from a sports point of view, but from the marketing point of view and all the other areas that we see exploding over the last couple of years. It's just really been remarkable and very exciting, and why it's so exciting for all of us heading to Los Angeles in May, seeing how the Sports Lawyers Association has really grown and diversified into so many different areas that we did not have 5, 10, or 15 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's a topic that we get into fairly often, but I think it deserves attention, which is, the story I've told, on this program and a number of times is I was on a call once with a bunch of lawyers representing conferences. And of course, because I can't help myself, towards the end of the call, I said, well, I only know 2 of you people that are members of the Sports Lawyers Association. Why don't you all become members? And one of the lawyers who represented one of the big conferences said very directly, I didn't even know I was a sports lawyer.
Wow.
And I said, well, you represent an collegiate athletic conference about participating in sports. So I kind of think you're a sports lawyer. And she was just like, I never thought I was a sports lawyer. And everybody kind of laughed. But I think what happens is that, as what you just said, there are so many points of entry to becoming a sports lawyer, given that it's not a discrete legal discipline. It's a huge area. And I think what we see, if we were to sort of leap 5-year periods over the last 20 or 30 years, we could both sort of say, oh, that didn't exist, that opportunity didn't exist. And now I think one of the ripest areas, obviously, and one which we'll certainly be touching upon in May at our conference, is what we're not quite 2 years yet into name, image, and likeness, but that's created a whole universe of opportunities for sports lawyers.
It's been a great way, as I've spoken to a number of law students, it's been a great way for some younger lawyers to get involved or emerge into the sports practice a little bit more than they would have been able to, because not all the deals are obviously $100,000 or $500,000 deals. Some of them are, a $2,000 appearance or a $2,000 clinic. So I've encouraged some of the younger lawyers to pursue those, because they're a great opportunity to learn, to meet people, and have a chance to expand upon your practice. The other thing is, you're saying, Bobby, which is incredibly true, is, now as I've tried to encourage some younger lawyers also, is you don't have to be a full-time lawyer to have part of your practice involve sports law. It can be trademark law, it can be esports, it can be so many different areas, it can be tax law, it can be estate and gift planning. There's so many different ways that they can involve themselves in a sports practice without having to be 100% sports lawyer, which frankly, many people and most people are not. Most of us dabble and have certain parts of our practice that touch on the sports, but we have other areas of our practice which allow us to expand upon and go in different directions. So yeah, you're absolutely right. The NIL is really an exciting time for young lawyers.
Yeah, look, I think you made a really good point. Is, we are on the board of the Sports Lawyers Association, and maybe it sounds a little sexier to call ourselves sports lawyers, but I have clients of mine who say, I'm doing a remodel, can you deal with the contractor? Well, I was a real estate lawyer 30 years ago, so sure, I still know how to do that. I can still.
But you're putting a gym in their house, so that makes you a sports lawyer, right, Bobby?
Or a dojo, or whatever weird creative thing they want to put in there. But I think that's really an important note, is that we have a skill set of, essentially, we are professional problem solvers and test takers. And as such, we have the resources to, spot an issue and figure it out. And the one thing I tell younger lawyers in particular is, to quote the great John Donne, no lawyer, or paraphrase, no lawyer is an island. And to that extent, although we have the skill set to go in and do the research, this thing might be our most valuable tool.
Boy, is that the truth.
Because the ability to just get on the phone and for me to call you and say, hey, Greg, I'm doing this kind of a deal, and those relationships are some of the best research tools we own in any practice area. And I think there's no emphasis given on that, certainly in law school. It's, learn how to do this, but without people, you're going to be adrift.
I think that's one of the greatest things, and I don't mean to be honest to promote the SLA, but I always feel like I want to and have to, because when you make that point, that's one of the wonderful things about our membership in the Sports Lawyers Association is, and I don't want to exaggerate, but it is like a fraternity or a sorority combined into one, where we have male and female lawyers who are so knowledgeable in so many different diverse areas that we have the ability to tap into those resources. If you have something that comes up and you've never done it before, you're not on an island by yourself. You can reach out to people who are probably experts in that area and get some guidance and counsel, so you are able to participate. But that's the most fun part of being able to share your insights and share your knowledge to be able to help other lawyers as well.
Yeah, and I appreciate that comment. And obviously, we're 5 weeks out from our annual conference, May 11th, 13th in Los Angeles, California, at the JW Marriott LA Live. Not that I'm promoting anything.
www.sla.com.
Sportspod.org. But I think it's really important that, now that we've had a rough 3 years. The world has had a rough 3 years. And last year we sort of had a peek into a bit of normalcy in Atlanta at our conference. And I think now we're ready to go back to where we were in 2019, 2018 and prior, where people can get together. And we've talked about this a lot. We've interviewed a lot of people. And I think the single universal truth, when you ask people about why are they members of the SLA, it comes out to relationships, people. And it can't be stressed enough. And obviously, I think it's most interesting for law students who show up and they go, oh, that's the general counsel of this club or of that league or of this or that. And then I remind these people all the time, well, why don't you go up and say hello? And it's like, can I do that? No, you must do that. That's part of developing your practice.
I think the one thing, God, Bobby, I'm sorry. I was going to say,
it's not about being obsequious. It's not about, being annoying. It's just about going up and saying, I just wanted to introduce myself. And you'll find that people will go, oh, are you a law student? Are you just starting in practice? And that engagement, I've never found in any other professional organization.
No, and I think the best part about it is that most of the people who are of that level where you're describing, general counsel of a team or a college or university, they are willing to interact. They don't just come and speak on their session, whatever, for half an hour or an hour, and then you never see them again. That's the best part. They will come because there's so many excellent speakers and so many excellent participants. They'll come and listen to some of the people when they speak. And that gives some of the younger lawyers an opportunity to rub elbows with these people and say hello and introduce themselves. And that's such a great part of it. I go back to before I think it was called the SLA, when we used to go into New York City and we'd leave with these really thick books of cases and stuff like that. And I'd go home and I'd pour through them and try and learn everything I could learn because I knew this is what I want to do for a living. But now the nice thing is between some of our programs, between some of the online programs. I mean, I just did a podcast recently with a 1L from USC who was tremendous. And we entertained, she did a great job talking about Kyrie Irving and all the issues arising from his suspension and all the legal issues. And it was wonderful because we got a chance to interact. Here I am as an old lawyer, and here she is a young lawyer about to become one. And it was the perfect forum. It was really enjoyable. And I know we're doing more of that. So again, I encourage, as I always try to, I encourage students to join because there's such a great upside for them to be able to interact and learn.
So you bring up a real interesting point when you talked about suspension of athletes. And obviously we'll call you a seasoned labor and employment lawyer. There's some interesting things going on. Recently, the Angels third baseman, Anthony Rendon, had a little disagreement with a fan in Oakland and got a 4-game suspension. Now, what's the line between fan engagement and where do you cross the line? And, if you're representing a guy like that, are you going to the commissioner going, come on, he just he wasn't screaming at the guy. He told him he was a jerk. I mean, we've all seen the video, but do you think we're going to see more of these kinds of disputes, or is the lesson going to be don't talk to fans, which seems anathema to growing sports?
Well, the hard part, Bobby, is, there's one thing between verbal, and we've seen LeBron and some of the NBA players direct some people within I'll say the security aspect of the arena to direct that certain fans be removed from the arena because they're being abusive, whatever they might be. I think the mistake, and I don't know Mr. Rendon, I don't know his agent. I used to always preach to my players, you can't touch somebody. You can't make physical contact. You can't grab their shirt. You can't do any of that stuff. If you want to do something verbal, probably not really well advised either, walk away. But that situation appeared as though it just evolved very quickly, and he reacted. And again, we're all human beings, even professional athletes have a tendency to sometimes overreact to something. And I'm sure in hindsight, he probably wishes he hadn't done it, because now he's suspended for 4 games. And again, chances are good most of those suspensions, sometimes they're reduced by a game or something, but very rarely is a suspension completely overturned. So he's now penalizing his team because his team's going to be without him. And he's penalizing himself because obviously he wants to play. So it's just an unfortunate situation that we see frequently. The one sport we don't see it quite as often, at least recently, is in hockey, where those fans are clearly divided by boards and glass. Whereas in basketball and baseball, there's a lot more access to between fan interaction and player interaction.
Yeah, I think that saved hockey a lot because you need the boards up there and the glass to keep.
Although years ago, I remember a Rangers Bruins game where they were climbing in the stands to fight. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh yeah.
When I was living back east, so we'll see what happens. But that's unfortunate. I think, like I said, anyone in hindsight who's an athlete always wishes they hadn't done it, and probably the fan does too. I mean, emotions just get out of control, and we've seen a lot more fan-on-fan issues lately, not necessarily even involving the athletes, but going back to a Ranger game last year where a fan was attacked for having the wrong jersey on. We see that in Raider games and things like that where fans are so vehement in their support that sometimes they cross over and they go over that line where it's no longer fandom, but it becomes abusive. And I think that's one of the things that always concerns me.
So on a big sports issue, and I know you might have a little interest in the game of basketball. So we just finished the men's and women's Final Four, which were basically a day apart, which was, I think, great for the sport. The women's final drew an extraordinary rating number, almost doubling the highest rating number ever. Lots of good stories around it. And for some reason, the men's game became sort of an afterthought. In my wildest dreams, I couldn't imagine that scenario, and yet it seemed to have played out this weekend.
I got to ask you, in your wildest dreams, would you have ever imagined Florida Atlantic University and San Diego State being in the Final Four this year? And I think that's an adjustment that people weren't used to. People were always, waiting to see their tops in their pool, the Dukes and the North Carolinas. And like we've seen last year, we had one Cinderella, with St. Peter's, but this year we had multiple Cinderellas. So I think, not that people weren't watching, but I don't think it was the same obsessiveness because they had already lost their pool. Their team was already out. Whereas, the women, first of all, they put on such a great show. I mean, there's some tremendous, tremendous talent among the women, not only among LSU, first of all, in Iowa, but teams leading up to that, even the Elite Eight. There was just some great games to watch with some incredible shooting and incredible ball movement and ball handling. It was really fun to watch. Not that the men's weren't, but I think people were really surprised by the women's game, and especially with the notoriety that was given to, when you have people who can shoot that well and score that well, that put a lot of people's attention and focus on it.
Well, I think that's an interesting perspective. I mean, going back to our conference with the topic this year's conference is the athlete. And now we're looking at, I think finally we may be getting to the value of Title IX as we see the growth of women's sports. The NWSL, now run by our own Jessica Berman, as the head of the NWSL, 2 new franchises. And the buy-in fee is getting to be real numbers now.
Yep.
For what it takes to get these franchises, and the interest. We have a team here in LA. It's in its 2nd season. They sell out the stadium, 22,000 every game. Sell
Well,
it
that's,
out.
I'm hoping we can see more of that growth for some of the, one of the articles I was reading the other day was about the quote, lack of potential opportunity for a number of these really good college women's basketball players. Where do they go from here? You know, so many of them try to make the WNBA and are not successful. They end up playing in Europe, which unfortunately for a lot of America's fans is out of sight, out of mind, which is truly unfortunate. But I'm hoping that perhaps the WNBA will continue to grow and have a fan base like you're describing in LA, which would really help to lead to more franchises, adding on a WNBA franchise.
Yeah, I think that's really important because, you know, this women's final, an extraordinary number on the rating, knocked everybody's socks off. And then you look at the ratings for the women's national soccer team, you know, a world beater, you know, coming up this summer, Women's World Cup. They're expecting huge ratings. So I think, you know, you have all of these new avenues for opportunity for women in sports. Now, the money's, there's a chasm in the money. You look at the LPGA versus the PGA, chasm. You look at WNBA and NBA salaries, an even wider chasm. And even between MLS and NWSL, you know, we've got to start bridging that gap. And, you know, I'm the media guy. So as you see the media numbers grow, you would assume that the dollars are going to start flowing into these women's sports. Do you think that's a reasonable place to get the growth of the income, you know,
I absolutely do,
squeeze
Bobby,
that
and
income disparity?
I absolutely do. And I was just going to tease you about, it's up to you to get the media dollars up. But I do agree with you. I think the media drives it because as people become more and more inclined and more interested to watch women's sporting events, which, you know, a decade ago, there wasn't a lot of interest in watching women's events. And I used to represent a women's softball player named Jenny Finch, who was incredibly talented,
The great
incredibly
Jenny
beautiful,
Finch.
incredible athlete. And she really didn't have any forum to take her skills when she was done with her athletic career, except to play in the Olympics. And then the Olympics eliminated softball as a sport. So I always think back to her.
I got to interrupt you. Let's not forget striking out 4 major leaguers and not, you know, major stars, and they couldn't touch her.
Well, I don't want to give it away, but you know, she mastered her softball. She was a tremendous pitcher. And it was funny, the one time we had her in a segment on This Week in Baseball, and I forget which player it was, but they kind of memorized her pattern. And I don't remember exactly. Let's say the third pitch was a changeup, and it was fastball, which they couldn't even touch. And then the changeup came in, and I forget who the player was, but he hit the changeup because he was sitting on it and waiting for it. But I just want to mention her as a tremendous example of where we have come with women's sports in this country. She wasn't a star 40 years ago. You know, she was a star not too long ago, and now to see the growth. And again, she would have been a phenomenon if we would have had NIL during her career at the University of Arizona, because she represented everything that was good about sports. She was articulate. She was very attractive, obviously. She was a tremendous athlete, and she loved meeting fans. I mean, that was the biggest thing. I've introduced her to a gentleman back east who has a program called Diamond Nation, and she is one of still their most favorites because the young kids come for clinics and stuff, and she'll stay for hours and talk and entertainment. So I'm hoping that's what we're going to see with women's basketball, with the soccer and everything else, to grow it on a grassroots level, to get that support, and having more and more young female athletes who are 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, competing to become the next generation of female superstar athletes.
Yeah, and I think that's a direct result of legislation from 50 years ago with Title
Absolutely.
IX that opened up these opportunities. When I was in high school, there were no sports for girls.
None. They
There
could
was
be
nothing.
a cheerleader, right? That was
You
about
could be a
it.
cheerleader. We had a woman who swam on our AAU club and had to get special permission to train with our boys team because it was just a boys sport and there was no girls swimming. You know, it's not that long ago, but now you see these opportunities opening up. And what's happened is with any new sport, you have to develop a culture of the sport. And, you know, soccer tried in the early 70s with Pele and the Cosmos, they tried to develop professional professional soccer, but there wasn't a culture of it in this country yet. But around that time, they started in 1964, you started your first youth soccer programs. So now you have multiple generations of kids growing up playing soccer, boys and girls. And now these girls are being able to play not just in high school, but on clubs, and then play university and have a professional outlet. And you have a whole fan base of people that have grown up playing the sport and can appreciate where it's come to. So I think we're in a good place. And I think the last couple of years, I think we're finally starting to see the development and the acceptance of real women's sports, and not just some sort of, oh yeah, them too.
I think you're right. I think that the level of talent is the biggest thing. Because, you watch that NCAA tournament, it was mind-boggling to watch the movement of the ball, the way they shoot, the defense. I mean, it really blew me away. And I don't want to come across as having been ignorant, but I would watch some women's games during the winter for basketball. But the NCAA tournament really blew me away, because obviously you pay a lot more attention then, and it was so impressive to watch these young female athletes perform.
Yeah, and they can shoot. Boy, can they shoot.
They sure can. The free throws are almost automatic, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, some of these women should just start getting jobs at the NBA, teaching NBA players how to shoot free throws.
That might happen. Who knows?
Well, look, I mean, Becky Harmon sat on the Spurs bench as a coach for years till she finally got a gig in the WNBA as a head coach. Why shouldn't she be a head coach in the NBA?
The same way we're seeing assistant coaches now who are females in baseball, we're seeing it in football, which for the same reason. Why shouldn't they be? In a lot of ways, they might be more cerebral about the aspects of the particular sport and being successful at it than the male athletes might be. Who knows? So I think it's wonderful as we're seeing the expansion. I think I just saw an article the other day, the first time a woman, and I don't remember what school it was, but she was pitching in an NCAA game. And I thought that was wonderful. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, why not? I mean, I remember, watching my kids when they were growing up in the 90s, and there were a couple of girls who didn't want to play in the softball league. They wanted to play Little League. And our league was like, sure, of course you can play.
We had the same thing for my son. He had a young a player he played with who had 3 other brothers, and she was the youngest sister. And I tell you what, she competed. She was excellent. She played Little League, and she went on to play softball at UCLA. So amazing. You see it young and they pursue it, and they're really good at it.
Well, Greg, look, it's been great having a little chat with you. Thanks for sharing some of what you've done and what you're doing. Thank you most of all for helping me to promote the Sports Lawyers Association Annual Conference, May 11th to 13th here in Los Angeles.
Where is it going to be, Bobby?
At the JW Marriott, LA Live. May 11th through 13th. You can go to sportslaw.org and register for the conference. And most importantly, April 17th is the end of early bird registrations. If you want to save a few dollars, go and register now. And more importantly, our hotel block is almost fully booked. So if you're planning on coming, I'd jump on it, because we've got a great rate for the hotel, and it's a great venue, and we'll have a really great time getting back together in person. So I look forward to seeing you all in May, and stay tuned, because Sports Oats will be back in 2 weeks. We've got some other webinars and other kinds of programs coming up throughout the year. And once again, this November, we'll be doing a fall symposium, which is a new exciting aspect of what we bring to our membership. So Greg, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you in a few weeks.
Bobby, thank you so much for having me. And the same here. I look forward to seeing you in LA.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
See you, everybody.